initially the people we told these things to were like, good luck with that. That sounds like something that would take probably, a much longer time and, probably going to involve a few hundred or thousand engineers. Um, you guys, a few people sitting in what seemed like a garage will not be able to pull off this kind of thing. And we're like, sure, okay, we'll take on this challenge. And 3 and 6 months later, we would actually deliver on that, right? So the second model, second generation of the motorcycle was actually outcompeting all the IC engine bikes in that segment.
Niraj and Narayan, tell me like your backstories before you guys got together to start Ultraviolette.
So our journey goes back a long way, perhaps spanning over 2 decades. Niraj and I went to the same school. We were competitors during our time at school. Went to the same university as well, where competition turned to collaboration. And across 4 years of our time at engineering, I think what excited us was going beyond the syllabus, trying to find new problems to solve. And this led us to take part in multiple creative design and engineering competitions across the IITs, the NITs. IIT Mumbai has a thing called the Tech Fest. IIT Madras has something called the Shastra. So these competition briefs, required us to solve problems by building robots, helicopters, aircraft, submarines, amphibious vehicles, and whatnot. Right. So I think over 4 years, we ended up winning over 40 odd competitions. Niraj, do you recall the exact number there?
Yeah, so we don't actually have the number. It was way more than 40, but in the early days we forgot to collect the certificate. We were more excited about the prize money, and we were just excited to get that and then head out to party. But what was sort of interesting is in the early days we would do these kind of slightly crazy experiment where it was we would win first place or it was nothing, right? It was nowhere in the middle, right? It was all or nothing. And then when we started to do this over and over again, we realized there is a certain skill or there's some bit of, creativity and skill coming together to make this happen. And from then on, it was just consecutive wins after the other, right? In all of these competitions, and to the point where the organizers knew that if we were there,
You're gonna win.
most likely the first place would be us.
Approach Niraj talks about is the core of it is being disruptive, right? Whether if there is a incremental solution that wouldn't excite us, and it was, like he said, try something new, and either it's a fabulous success or even more fabulous failure in that sense.
Cool.
So what did you guys do after your BTech?
So this was still the days where the conventional options were engineering or medicine. And I think through my 4 years, I figured that I want to be in the creative domain. So took some time off post BTech, figured out I want to get into the world of automobile design, and prepared, got into NID, National Institute of Design at Ahmedabad. It was a 2-year program. Worked with multiple companies on various projects. Worked with Mahindra two-wheelers, formerly while at Pune. And post this, the choice for me was to join the industry as a designer, but I was sort of disappointed that the ecosystem of the industry in India is more of a follower mindset and not an innovator or a trendsetter for that matter. And the real innovation and the trends were being set by the East or the West, and we were playing catch up, frankly. And that did not excite me, and I didn't want to spend the prime of my career in a facelift culture. So I went to Sweden to Neo Institute of Design to pursue another master's. Got into Royal College of Art in London. It was between London and Sweden, and I think for me at that point, both were great universities. But what excited me was to go outside of my comfort zone. This was a town very close to the Arctic Circle with about population of just about 45,000-50,000 people, and I'm probably the only person from India in a 100-kilometer radius, right? So winters that are 8 months, sunlight of 2 hours a day. So all of this really, really excited me. And one of the reasons, of course, I got a scholarship, their 100% scholarship as well, which made things a lot more accessible from the program itself. And this program is quite unique. All of our projects are with the companies based out of Europe, and continued this culture of taking part in design competitions. I won the Move Awards in Europe in 2013. Was then, incidentally, in Japan for the better part of 2013, working at the Daihatsu at Osaka. Post which
It
I went
was
to Volkswagen.
like a life project or something like that.
Yes. So I was a concept designer there, working on a concept car. And I mean, as you know, Daihatsu is in the K car segment in Japan. So very interesting, very different problems to solve from the automobile interior perspective. And by then it was about 2014, and Niraj and I had always been in touch. I think when he gets into his journey, he's going to give you a bit of other projects that we both are part of, post engineering as well. And we've been following the success of Tesla, and we knew we'd been working with lithium-ion batteries since 2003 or 4, right, from our days at moving. And we could see the larger companies have a lot of baggage and legacy. And while this was a strong point for the past few decades, it became an inhibitor to innovation or transition in the new era of mobility, right? And I think that prompted me to take the leap, come back to India, get started with a few experiments that ultimately morphed into what Ultraviolette is today.
And what about you, Niraj? What did you do after your BTech?
So my journey has been kind of intertwined with sort of Narayan's journey at various points. I was always sort of this geeky kid who liked to write code and started programming at a very young age. To the point which is before taking up engineering itself, I sort of had gone through the entire syllabus and had a fair sense of programming, C++, all of these things, right? So
this was days when we were on Hotmail, and I think we were in 5th or 6th grade, and I was talking to my parents about Niraj, and they wouldn't believe me, and then he hacked my dad's email, right? And then suddenly everyone's looking at this not differently.
Yeah, so there was a sort of fascination with computers and electronics all throughout, right? And even before getting into engineering, I had taken up electronics to study because I completed the entire computer science syllabus, right? Even what we call after the 10th, 11th, and 12th. So studied electronics and then got back into computer science for the undergrad sort of course, right? And throughout the entire course, while programming was a core part of my sort of learning, because I was so obsessed with that, I was also seeking out other areas, and that's where we ended up in all these competitions and robotics and all of these things, right? So by the end of engineering, what had happened is that I'd gotten a pretty amazing offer to join Yahoo, right? Because in the heydays of Yahoo, and pretty exciting offer was there. And at the same time, my interest was there in hardware. So I joined Yahoo in Bangalore, was shuttling between Bangalore and their campus in California. And also at the same time was tinkering with hardware, drones, all of it. So by the time I was in my second year at Yahoo, again started on working on weekends, and Narayan was also involved. Got back in 2009, started thinking about a startup which worked on autonomous drones, working on the limitations of drones, right? Drones and quadcopters and these UAVs have a flight time of about 40 minutes. So the idea was that is a limitation. How do we make energy more easily accessible such that these things can be in the air all the time? So quit Yahoo to pursue this full time actually in 2010. It was a little ahead of its time in terms of not the tech, but the idea that I could start a company and do something like this. I think Narayan was also involved. He was in different parts of the world. We were collaborating on all these things. Realized that it wasn't just the tech that is going to be needed to solve some very hard problems like this. And that's when I decided, even though I'm a very technical sort of tech focused person, I decided to study, do a master's degree in business, right? And that's when I went to AIM in Manila, Philippines. So spent 2 years in Philippines, completed my MBA, came back to Bangalore, but wanted to get back into technology. The idea was always that, at some point, we're going to end up starting a venture. We should know how to run a business. We should have the basics of business in place. right? And whatever it takes to build a business, that should also be there. While innovation is tech and tech is at the core, it must run as an independent business, right? So came back to India, worked with another value-based company while my student loans were being paid off, right? This was NetApp. Again, it was an exciting opportunity. I was working with their, what is called their advanced technology group. There were about 50 postdoctoral researchers, PhDs in different parts of the world. And my job was to commercialize their ideas, right? So fast forward that to, I think, around the time when Narayan and I, again, we were reconnected. Narayan was thinking about coming back to India. And 2015, late 2015, I had also by then started another company, and we sort of reconnected, and Narayan
This was here
was,
now, the other
yes,
company you started. And what were you doing
yeah.
there?
So here now was started with a colleague of mine from NetApp. So the idea here was that, smartphones had already become quite prevalent in our society, right? But there was still some problems that hadn't been solved in terms of, we had social networks, we had, hyperlocal apps and all of that. And our idea was to enable connections between people who didn't know each other, but who shared a common experience or a common location. So here now was intended to connect people who previously did not know each other, but, have some shared interest. And we sort of started to scale that in Bangalore, grew to about, if I remember correctly, about from 10, 20,000 users, right? And we also realized it's going to take time to scale, right? This was, I think we realized the certain limitations of that. We didn't want to pivot into sort of turning it into a hyperlocal commercial app. We wanted the community to grow, but there are certain limitations to that. And along the way, I think it was a difficult journey. And we realized that, all of the founders have different interests. And that's when, I started thinking about what do we do next. And Narayan, had already started working on various aspects of what would become Ultraviolette. And I think formally we started Ultraviolette in December 2015, January 2016.
And what was were you clear that you want to do a two-wheeler form factor and an electric vehicle, or did that clarity come along the way?
The one phase of what Niraj mentioned, right, 2015, was experimenting. So I think at that point, we were evaluating different products, different markets, figuring out the product market fit, the kind of team that we would need to build, benchmarking other companies and seeing what it's taken for two-wheeler and four-wheeler manufacturers to get to a certain proof of concept and kind of scale. So we looked at micro-mobility, single-wheel, self-balancing vehicles to hybrid bicycles, the pedelec segments. We looked at scooters, we looked at performance vehicles, we looked at four-wheelers. So we looked at the entire spectrum, and I think we built out proof of concept for at least 3 of these subcategories in that 1 year. So 1 year was, I think, 4 of us logging maybe 16, 18 hours a day and crazy hacky solutions to build out different POCs. And I think what we realized was in between met a few investors, we figured if your product is for a certain market, it makes sense to be located there. And by which time we built a certain traction with the team here in Bangalore. And if you have to narrow down to looking at India first and then building a global company as an extension of that, the challenge in the electric vehicle, we went down to the deepest layer, and that layer was the emotional or the perception of electric vehicles, right? The perception, I think largely due to the low quality vehicles that have been imported in the country, was not that great. And I think if we had to make a long run in this industry, when first we tackle the problem of perception, which means the first product we build out needs to have a very strong emotional pull, right? It cannot be a utility segment, and which is why we narrowed down to the motorcycle segments, right? I mean, cars would have taken us maybe 8 to 10 years of development time. Visibility into that kind of capital wasn't, we didn't have clarity on that. We didn't want to build a scooter company, which is one of the 100 scooter companies that you see today, where the differentiator is only the lower cost that you're offering to a customer. But our strength lie in creativity, design, tech, and innovation. And that all of that now aligns to the mid-segment or the performance motorcycle category.
Yeah, and just to add to what Narayan's saying, see, I think we also realized that this was going to be a hard, long journey, right? This was not something that we are doing to sort of get a quick buck, or because it is required fundamental innovation. Half of the things that were needed on the motorcycles did not exist, right? Whether you call them the battery packs, the drivetrain, the powertrain, right, the vehicle electronics. None of the existing solutions would do the job. You can't take something that is built for a car and fit it onto a motorcycle, right? Even though it may be sophisticated and technologically advanced. You can't take something that is built for a low power, scooter segment and put it onto a motorcycle because it will not do the job, right? So we were in the middle of two extremes and there was no tech readily available to us, which meant that everything had to be built ground up, which meant that it was going to take time. And it was really a question of, how many people are going to stick through this to build it out? Because over time that becomes a sort of moat, it becomes a sort of differentiator. And it's actually what has happened today, right? We're quite ahead of the industry. And it's going to give us a few years of a head start from, where the competition's at.
You would be in like a performance motorcycle segment?
Yeah.
Are there other players of the segment? EV performance motorcycle?
So there are companies which are in different parts of the world, I would say, in Europe and in the US. But essentially what they have
in
also...
India, there's nobody?
In the kind of power band that we are talking about, right? So if you look at motorcycles which have north of 20 kilowatts of peak power, more than 140 kilometers per hour top speed, or anything north of 200 kilometers of range, you won't find anything in India other than the Ultraviolette F70, right? Which is kind of, there are companies which make motorcycles, electric motorcycles, but, it's more of a shell over a low power drivetrain.
Okay. And when you say the engine power is 20 kWh, what does that mean? How does it compare to, like, I know a Bullet is like 350 cc engine.
Yes.
Is there a way to understand what that means, 20 kWh?
Yeah. So
our platforms are 30 kilowatt and above. I think what Niraj mentioned is beyond 20, there is nothing, but we are already at 30. That translates to about 40 horsepower. And if you look at the industry, that typically you have vehicles between 300 to 500 cc outputting that kind of power.
Yeah, so it matches with the power band of typical IC motorcycles, right? It essentially boils down to the same physics, which is how much power are you putting out, and that is, you can represent that in kilowatts or in bhp. And the idea is if you're building a mid-segment motorcycle which is intended to compete or outcompete 300 to 500, 600 cc bike, you have to operate in that same power band. So from that perspective, I think there aren't too many options globally as well. And the few other options that exist in other parts of the world are priced significantly higher than IC motorcycles, right? So if, for example, the IC motorcycles in all of these segments, for the purpose of this discussion, if we talk in US dollars, right, are priced between anywhere, $6,000, $7,000 to, $10,000, $11,000, right? The EV options were at $20,000 or $30,000, right? So it was not really that, the EV companies globally were able to sort of directly compete with the mainstream IC motorcycles. And that's where we had to build the tech ground up to be able to even match that price point and make a meaningful impact in this segment.
So what is the pricing of the F77?
About average between $4,000 and $5,000, north of 3.5 to about 4.5 lakh rupees.
Yeah, 3.5 to 4.5 lakh. Okay.
Yeah, right. So which means, we can directly compete with the IC engines, even in terms of upfront price. And that was a big factor in, making EVs mainstream and taking on the IC.
Okay. And, how long did it take you to make the F77 come true, to make that dream come true? I'm sure it must have been a journey which needed multiple things to go right, from funding to technology to even the vendor ecosystem. And so just tell me about that journey of making that F77 dream come true. Was this clear to you in terms of that something like the F-77 is what you want to build?
That we were clear on, not the shape and form, because that was still left to ideation. But we were clear we wanted to create an identity for what electric is, right? It needs to be very honest to its attributes and performance. So there is no point looking at existing ICs and deriving something from it, which is why we took a round-up new approach. And like Niraj mentioned, every single thing on the vehicle had to be designed from scratch. You're talking about a battery pack today that weighs north of 60 kgs, and you're talking about offsetting masses on an IC engine vehicle, which are an engine, fuel tank. Engine is about 50-20 kgs, fuel tank about 10 kgs, and you have multiple other parts. But the architecture is very different. The components are very different, which means the entire chassis and the frame had to be reimagined from scratch. And in fact, this is where I think we'll start touching upon influences of the world of aviation. So the person who heads engineering at Ultraviolette, the mechanical side and the chassis design, in fact, came from aviation aerospace background. He was dealing with designing landing gears for various aircraft around the world. And more stuff has happened on the aviation plant with regard to our battery architecture, which we'll get into in some more detail. But these were solutions that we found along the way because equivalent talent was not available from the pure automotive industry. Right? And we had, to answer your first question, we had factored about 5 years. We targeted 2020. I think COVID sort of threw everybody's plans off by a fair bit. I think we went through that. I think we had a phase of a 18-20 month period during COVID where focused innovation happened on the battery front, and we've doubled the range from where it was before that in 2019 to what we ultimately launched in 2022. We were at 150 kilometers in 2019, and what we put out in the market in 22 was 300 kilometers. And that was, I think, a huge milestone in terms of technical development from a vehicle design perspective. Yeah, so we thought five turned into 7, and I think we were fairly on track with our schedule, but yeah.
Sure. So the F-77, the first 7 actually stands for the 7th generation of the motorcycle, right? So from 2016 to 2020, we had gone through 7 versions, which were not incremental changes, but, significant improvements on the motorcycle, right? The first version was solely on the battery technology, right? So the first version that we built out had very smart batteries. This was the early days of actually proving that can we build out a battery pack that meets the performance and safety requirements of a motorcycle in this segment, right? So it wasn't so much about optimizing for let's say the power or the handling of the vehicle or the dynamics of the vehicle. It was purely about the battery pack and making sure that the BMS and the cells were all operating in place. So that was the first version in 2016. This was prior
this
to
would be like a hand assembled kind of a thing.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. The team was about 4 or 5 people, and this was prior to any investment, if I remember correctly. Right, this was where we were bootstrapped at that stage, and with that vehicle is where we put that together, made it functional, and that's when we started talking to investors, and they started to see and realize that there's something here that that seems quite fascinating. And by the time we were talking to all of these investors and capital advisors, we had already started working on the 2nd generation of the vehicle, which now we were heading on to solve the performance related aspects, right? So the kinds of promises we are making was that in 3 months we're going to build out a motorcycle that can outcompete any of the 300 to 500 cc bikes in terms of straight line speed, right? In terms of straight line axle rate. And initially, the people we told these things to were like, good luck with that. That sounds like something that would take probably, a much longer time and, probably going to involve a few hundred or thousand engineers. You guys, a few people sitting in what seemed like a garage will not be able to pull off this kind of thing. And we're like, sure, okay, we'll take on this challenge. And 3 and 6 months later, we would actually deliver on that, right? So the second generation of the motorcycle was actually outcompeting all the IC engine bikes in that segment, right? And this was actually quite a far-fetched thing to actually accomplish. And for a second generation or second version of a prototype to actually do that was pretty outrageous, right? So, but if you think back to our background, I think that was what we were good at, right? Which is building something fundamentally new from scratch and doing that in a sort of very accelerated timeline, right? So basically what ended up happening is through each version like this, we would take on and solve problems which people thought would take a much longer time. We didn't take it all on at once also, right? For example, from the second generation to the third generation, the batteries had to get smaller, more modular. It wasn't weight and volume optimized, right? So we went down from what used to be modular 14, 15 kilo battery pack to 9 kilo battery pack. And there were 3 of them at that point, right? We reduced the sort of, bill of materials on the vehicle, made it more streamlined, more efficient, made it more dynamic. Now we started getting into the dynamics of the vehicle.
Oh yeah, I think the focus here came from the fact that we were very clear on being on the unit economics making sense, right? We knew the industry is still nascent, but like I mentioned earlier, we were building for the long term, and this meant that the business had to make sense from the first product use. So, which is why, just talking about bill of materials as early as the second prototype, right? Along with bill of materials, we had some of our suppliers in the loop, the vendor and the supplier ecosystem, to figure out whether things that are doable at a prototype stage, are they actually scalable into mass production? Because if you solve it, if you spend significant time engineering for a prototype and you're not able to translate that into something that can be mass produced, it is redoing that effort all over it, right? So unit economics making sense, time being optimized from a development standpoint were two very important factors for the two of us. And I think now that has translated to the core team at UV as well. And along with this, I think the space that Niraj is talking about, this transition between first and second prototype and figuring out the batteries, is where we were also running out of funds. It is capital that we had saved during our time working in the industry, but we had I think it's an important juncture because that's where our first investment happened, and that's a key milestone in this whole journey. So we had Niraj over 100, 200 meetings and interviews with various advisors and VCs and all of that, and very skeptical feedback from everybody we met. But there was this individual called Vishesh Rajaram, who was in Chennai, and he was getting into angel investment at that point, right? He was setting up his fund, and I think he met us, he saw the tech that we built, and for him, the fact that we are both passionate and we share a good amount of expertise and problem-solving abilities in our core, in what the business is at the core, right? This was important for him, and I think he took a bet, put in the first angel investment, looped in very prominent actor Dulquer Salman from the Indian movie industry, and I think they both came together for the first investment, and I think that sort of really helped accelerate innovation from beyond where our personal means would allow us to get to.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And
So that was your angel round with Dulquer and Vishesh.
yes. And so that's when we started making significant progress, building out the team, went to the second prototype. Along this time is where, TVS Motors also started taking a look at what we were doing. And the investment from TVS also, if I remember, happened in 2017, right? It took a period of time from their perspective to evaluate the company and sort of come on board. And that's where, post that is where the suppliers and the ecosystem also opened up to us, right? Because even from a supplier ecosystem perspective, they have hundreds of EV companies to look at. And for them, it's hard to tell which are the ones where, there is a serious effort being put and which are the ones which, are there tomorrow. I mean, may not be there a few months from now. Right? So that was the kind of thing that was going on. And this is where the supplier ecosystem interactions for our vehicle part subsystems started to happen, and the iterations to sort of get it into a final manufactured form. And that's where iteration, the generation of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 started to happen, right? And as we got closer and closer to the mass production versions of the vehicle, the effort on testing validation became very heavy, right? Because it became about running hundreds and thousands of kilometers every day, having test riders, uh, running each of the subsystems through, component level tests where, whether it's the handlebar or the chassis in itself, will it be able to withstand 100,000 kilometers or 500,000 kilometers, right? So these aspects of the engineering, durability, accelerated life testing, that's what started to come into, the next generations of the vehicles. While obviously the plastic, the aesthetic, the design element, the ergonomics, all of these things started to get finalized, formalized, and things started to progress on that front, right? And through this entire period, right, we were always talking to different parties who could support us. And I remember the number because we actually tracked this number. We did over 900 meetings with investors and things like that. And the reason I think for the skepticism from different parties here is because they haven't seen this kind of success happen, in the industry in India, right? They've seen software companies succeed. They've seen software as a service, but hardware companies, and even when you talk about hardware, you're talking about very specialized tech. They haven't seen so many successes in India, right? So, which was one of the reasons I think which it took us a while to realize that maybe we also have to realize this, and we just have to get through this, right? We find the right people to back us, and we'll be on our way. And it's going to be hard for us. It's hard for anyone else in this space as well, right? And over time, I think by the time
this is quite counterintuitive, right? You look at all the leading tech companies globally, it's folks from India that are sort of pushing the boundaries and driving development, right? So for us, all of this seems so natural and quite frustrating that, the rest of the world that we are talking to in terms of supporting us or being part of our journey is unable to wrap their minds around. So,
yeah. But the good part is I think we got around to, 2019 where we did a formal launch event. This was in November 2019 where we announced
how much
the
had you raised by 2019 in terms of fundraise?
Okay, let me try to remember. I think we had raised by then probably $20 million.
Okay.
15 to 20, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah.
And this is from TVS and Angel Networks and...
Yes, by then we also had support from Mr. Kumar and Sridhar Vembu, the Zoho group, right? So they were strong proponents of, making in India, building up core engineering, core technology, and they really appreciated what we were trying to do. And
Kumar and Sridhar Vembu are related, is it?
Yes. Both of them are founders of Zoho. Zoho is a pretty large company, right? And Kumar came in first alongside TVS from Go Frugal Technologies, and then Mr. Sridhar also invested in Ultraviolette, right, through Zoho. Yeah, and I think for them it was also about core engineering work and core intellectual property being built out in India, right? It's not just okay, we'll assemble parts together and build something, with where the core IP belongs elsewhere. There's nothing very innovative on the design or nothing innovative on the tech. It wasn't like that. That's what excited them about. So through this
and all of the early folks were in it for the long run, which was quite heartening for us, because in that journey to 2019, the first 3.5 years, of course there were periods of uncertainty. There were periods of now we have certain support now who's going to see this through to the next phase. We are pushing everything from our side in terms of building the tech and building expertise on the design side and building what today is a very strong brand as well. While we're doing that, I think there were multiple options for us or opportunities from other people to partner with us if we were to digress from our plans or deviate or narrow down focus or focus elsewhere. So all sorts of advice came in, but the core group of investors that we had on board were very clear of the fact that we are in this to help you guys disrupt and build something amazing. So don't worry too much about the future. Let's focus on what we set out to do. And they were pretty confident that if we get most of it right, we should have a way forward, right? I think this sort of backing was very encouraging, even at times where we were worried about what's going to happen 2 months down the line.
Yeah, and we would like what Narayan's talking about here is also, different types of investors who see certain other segments and say that why don't you make battery packs? Why don't you just import parts from other parts of the world? Let's get started. Just sell something. Doesn't matter if it's good or not. Let's figure out the business part and then you guys can do all this design innovation. Why do you want to do all of this right now? Why don't you build a three-wheeler? Why don't you build, a low-powered scooter? That's where the market's at. That's where the opportunity is. India, is a economy where the price points are very low. Why don't you stick to that, right?
There are other folks doing it, right? And if that is the only focus, I don't think that reflects good on what India is capable of also. We need more such endeavors. And I think today, perhaps we should catch up with Vishesh. He's invested in a lot of deep tech companies. Ultraviolette was one of the first companies he invested in. But beyond that, he's sort of backing space tech, satellite companies, AR, VR companies, hardcore robotics and vision-based systems. So I think this culture is starting to build, and I think we hope it's only going to sustain or scale higher and higher.
Yeah. Right. So
by 2019, when so you said in 2019 you did a commercial launch.
Yes, we did an unveiling.
It was a unveil.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
okay.
This
so,
was
like what
2 months before COVID.
In the typically you have this auto expo kind of a thing where they show models which they're going to launch soon. So it was something similar to that. Like you displayed the model.
It was a little more serious. It was a fully functional vehicle, but it was from the pre-production set of vehicles at that point. The next phase for us was to kickstart production, and I think that is exactly when COVID took the whole world by storm.
Okay. A couple of questions before we go ahead. That 2019 stage, when you reached there, how big was the company? What was your headcount like?
47.
And what was these were like?
I think
designers
and was about 47 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
About what was the makeup of
design
this
team?
Yes.
Whole design team would be about 10 people.
Yes.
And I think about 30 engineers across electronics, mechanical, software, and maybe a few people on HR and other functions.
Yeah, sourcing was an important function that we always had because the parts were coming from different suppliers and all of that. So we had a strategic sourcing team of a few people, and that was the stage. But yeah, very heavy on engineering is what I would say.
How did you build this team? How did you figure out that whether to go and hire people from legacy automotive companies or to hire people who are let's say someone from an NID or just talk to me about building this team.
So one thing that helped was that I mean, Niraj, I'm just talking about our background and the fact that we had worked in the industry, right? We weren't freshers. And the fact that both of us had experience working and studying both in India and overseas gave us a very good knack of identifying what sort of folks we need and how to sort of cut through the noise and figure out who's capable of executing things, right? So this led us to very unique ways of identifying, I would say, the first 20, 25 people in the company. And we would have sort of spent 20, 30 hours with various people and gotten to a point where we know for a fact that this is the sort of chemistry that we're looking for in the team. It went all the way from folks that we knew in our professional circles to extensive LinkedIn hunt, to Niraj just spent time going through various blogs and projects that people have done beyond their everyday work. And I think this sort of passion-driven people that we were looking for, but very, very strong with their core expertise. And today they are still very much with the company and leading much bigger team.
So I think what was interesting through this phase was that some not so intuitive things that we learned, right? As a large company, what ends up happening, you create a job description, you create this entire, hierarchy and structure and put all these boxes, and for each box you attach a position, a title, and some job responsibilities, and then you put out that as an opening and hope, people come in and apply for that, right? But that was not the way that it actually panned out. In fact, it was the other way around, right? We would go looking for individuals and we would see where are the passionate people. We would go through their project, whether it's on GitHub or, on their blog, on their side project. And we would see who are these individuals, reach out to them, call them over on weekend. Most of them were actually already working in the industry, right? They were fairly senior in their career. They've worked for, 10, 15 years. They already have a stable job, and we couldn't even directly tell some of these people that come over and, be part of Ultraviolette. We couldn't do that because we were too small at that stage. What we would actually do is we were genuinely seeking out advice on how to build teams, and we were learning through the process, and they would come over on weekends, spend time with us. And over a period of 3-4 weeks, that's where Narayan mentioned, right? You'd end up spending 20, 30 hours with some of these individuals. We would realize that, and they would also realize that this is more exciting than their day job. And they would say, what would it take for me to be part of Ultraviolette? What do you guys think? And what then ended up happening was that the company started being built around these core pillars, right? And the jobs that were created around them, right? They had some core skills. They were looking for additional support, and we would hire more individuals. So it was built ground up that way, based on the strengths of individuals in all these companies.
And the last office that Niraj was talking about, right? One of the early ones, the garage setup. We had about 7 tables there. Each table had one individual, and that was a department.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we had design, software, power electronics, prototyping. What else, Niraj?
Yeah,
Embedded
so
had
the finance
one-
table
one
was also my
dedicated-
table.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting that way to build out the team. Not something that any textbook would ever teach us, or any course would ever guide us.
Help me understand what each of these departments does in terms of contributing to the end product. So
Okay,
design
so-
means like designing the chassis and like how aerodynamic it is, and
So in our case, since we're creating something from scratch, every team had to work together. Today, if you look at the industry, if you look at the company launching a new product, they would already have a chassis and they probably do a facelift on the body or things like that. And it's seldom that you take an all new approach altogether. Most vehicles that get launched today have a fair share of shared components from a previous platform that the company has, right? So for us, it was a blank slate, which means battery teams, the power electronics teams, the folks working on the chassis, the design teams, the UX teams, all had to coordinate on a day-to-day basis to figure out that everyone's, cohesively heading to solving the same problem. And I think a fair part of our time, Niraj and me, was also in making sure that this alignment was clear across all the teams, right?
Okay. So let's take it one at a time, right? So just sort of starting with design, right? Design entails everything from market research, user studies, the UX, the user interactions, the ergonomic, the emotional appeal of a vehicle, the exterior, the surfaces, how these surfaces interact with each other, how the form comes together on the motorcycle, right? And what kind of appeal it has to the end consumer, right? This is just from, that perspective, everything where the customer or the rider actually interact with the vehicle, right? So from here, there's also a lot of interaction with the mechanical engineering, which is, detailed out internal structures of the vehicle, right? You have your what is called the A surfaces, which are the outside surfaces of the motorcycle. You have your B surfaces, which are on the inside. And then you start to have elements which interact with the chassis or, the frame of the vehicle, right? And that's where, a lot of core engineering, mechanical engineering, simulation, what they call CFD, computational fluid dynamics, CA, the design element of engineering all come together and validate whether these are structurally sound, right? So we're still talking right now about design and engineering, detailed engineering and analysis simulation. When it comes to the electronic side and the software side, you have embedded system software, which is most of the vehicle related software, right? That's running on the microprocessors, on the microcontroller. So that is one team. Then we have the digital electronic. The digital electronic refers to all of the logical circuits that are helping making these core decisions. When you turn your throttle, how much torque needs to be delivered. So those circuits, right, which are evaluating the more signals aspect of it. So that's the digital electronics part. The analog in the power electronics is more to do with, higher currents, where, switching is involved, where core functionality of powering down the lights or, the subsystem, and it's sort of heads into power electronics, which is core elements of the, drivetrain, for example, right? How do you charge a vehicle? How do you convert electrical energy into mechanical energy? That's where the power electronics comes in, or the other way around, right? How do you convert electrical energy from your grid into chemical energy in your battery back to the chargers come into picture. So that's where power electronics comes in, right? Then comes aspects of, for example, the battery engineering, because batteries are a very separate and different kind of, how do I put it? Because it's a combination of mechanical engineering, the way the cells come together, the interconnect. It's a power electronics problem because there is a BMS. There's digital electronics, which is the safety aspect. There's software on the BMS, which also relates to safety.
BMS is battery management software.
Yes, battery management system. Software is a part of that. Yeah, right. So the battery team is one independent team, right, which has all of the elements. And then there are, vehicle electronics. So that's how it sort of flows. And it all has to come together as in the form of a vehicle, right? And that's where, our role would sort of come in to make, all of this come together in a manner, which is that it's operating as a seamless, one single unit, one single vehicle, and not as separate systems. It had to operate in a seamless way.
How does the electric current get converted into motion? I mean, in a ICE engine, there is that piston which moves because of explosion of the fuel. How
Yes.
does it happen in an EV?
Okay, so if you go down to the core of it, it finally boils down to the motor, right? It boils down to the play between electricity and magnetism, right? Any sort of, whether you take induction motor or whether you take, permanent magnet-based motor, you have alternating current, which either induce a current in the rotor, right, which then opposes the current and sort of then induces motion, or you have an alternating current which opposes a magnetic field where magnets are involved, and then the magnet is forced to move in the rotor. The rotor is the only part which has the freedom to move, right? So that it finally translates to that, right? And this technology, I think, has been around from the early 1900s. It has obviously been refined from our, hydroelectric plant to more portable motors to, everywhere in terms of turbine. And that has now reached a stage where we are able to put this kind of power density onto a motorcycle, which, that we can control with our hands, and where we have a battery that can also throw the energy.
And do you use a BLDC technology for the motor?
Yes. So the BLDC, PMSM, so these are different terms, right? So permanent magnet synchronous motor, permanent magnet AC motor. BLDC is still, brushless DC motor, but the common aspect is the magnets using, neodymium or what they call rare earth magnet. And the idea behind BLDC, PMSM, PMAC, all it comes down to power density and being able to, put out that kind of power in a small volume and compact.
And does the design happen like first you create a digital version, like a digital twin, and then you make it into a real life version? Is that how it happens? Like first it's a simulation.
I think the first 2 years we worked both in parallel. Simulation, but I think solving things from a battery and like Niraj mentioned, getting batteries capable of outputting power to produce a 300 cc plus performance, right? That required real world testing. So I think while we were doing a lot of simulation, we prioritized real world output in the initial phase. And I think after the first 2 years, both sort of came in quite seamlessly.
And I think from a design perspective, I think also what is interesting is from the design team's perspective, what was very fascinating and interesting for me to see as a sort of engineer who hadn't seen that before is the way the design team actually was working, right? So there was lots of usage of, VR, where actual motorcycles were being rendered in 3D and, we were doing that for the first time because we were accelerating the progress, because normally what ends up happening is you build a physical structure or a prototype, it's milled out of clay or, some kind of, hard structure, and then only you have a sense of what it is in 3 dimensions, right?
Which
so
is
even
a
there,
3 to 4 month process. So
yeah,
our intention was, before we invest time and capital into building those out, how do we get a real world sense? And that's where VR came into play.
so a lot of VR was being done and a lot of hand sculpting happened at a later stage, and then it went back into 3D and into the virtual world, and from there the simulations continued.
Okay, cool. So let's come back to 2019. You did you unveiled the vehicle, and you wanted to manufacture it. How did you want to manufacture it? Did you want to invest in setting up a plant, or did you have some sort of vendors who would manufacture it for you, or how would it get done?
So we were at that point, we had evaluated all these different options and we had sort of narrowed down that we would do the manufacturing, but at a scale that would make sense for us, right? We knew that, we would have to start our own pilot production plant. And in January of 2020, that was what we were looking for, right? That was essentially, we're going ahead with the tooling, the dies, the fixtures with all our suppliers. And we were actually identifying a place where we would produce the motorcycles for the first time. So this was happening all the way from September 2019 to January 2020. And late in January 2020.
What capacity plant did you want to set up?
So at that time, also we were looking at a plant capacity of about 10,000 to about 30,000 vehicles annually. And that was the capacity that we, right? Now, interestingly enough, in late January, we were traveling around different parts of the world. I remember we were in Dubai for some event, and we started to hear news about what would end up becoming the pandemic. Right?
Okay.
Right? There's something going on there that in February we knew it's going to turn out to be a little crazy. And we sort of started planning in February, almost 45 days before the first lockdown, that may not make sense at this point of time, even though we had announced it publicly. So we started planning out how would we operate if it goes into this kind of lockdown, right? And that was a little hard to do, right? All of our engineers are working with hardware. You need equipment. You need tons of, other people's support, whether it is technicians or other engineers. They all need to be co-located. Work from home isn't a real possibility. So we were grappling with this for the first time. And before the lockdown actually hit, find out how the company would sort of be spread across the city and into different labs.
I think whoever had real estate available in their homes and garages that were empty, we sort of set up labs, and I think people would work in clusters. I think the other problem was we don't know how long this is going to last, right? Is it a month? Are we looking at a quarter? And over time, it got a lot more scary, right? You don't know, is it going to last a year? And then when is the whole industry going to get back to that well-oiled state that it was before the pandemic? So not only are we accounting for the pandemic itself to subside, but there is a significant period after that where everything takes time to fall back into place as well. So we ended up sort of realizing that, see, this is not when production is going to happen, right? So we asked ourselves, what would we want to do in this period of time where production is not possible? And the quick realization that happened was, how about we work on the next generation of the vehicle, which we always wanted to sort of put out, right? So what are the limitations?
That time, which generation? It was the fifth?
this was actually the seventh one that we had put out. So technically we have the eighth generation, but we still call it the S77, right? But we sort of had put out these range numbers of 150 kilometers. It was roughly a 4.5 kilowatt hour battery pack, right? And we realized that the requirement to build that vehicle was from a, psychological requirement of crossing 100 kilometers on a motorcycle, right? So we had reached 131 kilometers. But then we looked at all the feedback. People, there's a insatiable thirst for range. Can you give me more range? Can you give me 200 kilometers? Right? So we said, let's go back to the drawing board. How much can we get out of the vehicle? 200 is an obvious target. Let's get 200 kilometers of range on the bike. And let's see what we can go beyond that as well. And that's where we started to rework the batteries and the core engineering. And over time, through 2021, 2022, we ended up the motorcycle that does 307 kilometers, which, outsurpassed even the requirement of just 200.
Yeah, and the crazy part was the price can double, right?
Yeah.
I think that was the hard part for us to manage. Of course, solving for the tech took a lot of time, but making sure the price points are still in the zone of where these motorcycles lie was also very important.
How much money in the bank did you have when COVID hit?
I
don't remember exactly what it was.
How much runway, how many months could you have?
We were planning to go to production, and since we didn't do that, I think we were able to manage the finances.
Okay,
yes,
you were better capitalized. Okay.
Thank a few people who helped us also along the way. Of course, our investors have always been supportive.
Right.
Our owners, for instance, the building owners where our R&D was operating, they spoke to us and told us, hey guys, I know the whole world is going through a tough time. We are going to reduce rent for you for the foreseeable future. So similar to this, you shout out to them. Very, very cool people. They love what we're doing. We've been in the same facility for about 6-7 years now. The first 4 years was R&D, and now the last 1.5 years, it's been the retail experience. And so similar to this, there are a lot of people who extended support in multiple ways. All of that added to, making this sustainable.
Yeah. Also, I think what helped was we hadn't sort of taken that decision to take a production facility and, go all out on that, because we sort of took that call in January. It was, at that time, it felt like it wasn't a very, there wasn't sufficient information to say that this is actually going to turn into a pandemic. But we still took that call, right? And that was an important thing, because otherwise we would have spent several millions of dollars on a production facility and whatnot. And the recovering from that would have been much, much harder.
Yeah, we were going through contracts at that point, various contracts of real estate options and facilities, and working with auditors to figure out what makes sense, etc. But we sort of put a blanket freeze on all of that till we had more information.
Okay, got it. Interesting. And I guess you raised your next round in 21, like $17 million.
Yes, it was in 22. And that was a $24 million round. And this was actually prior to the launch of the vehicle that is in the market today, right? So by this time, I think everything had been sort of cycled down. Things that our production facility was up, the certifications were done. We had a sense that this vehicle is actually going to, hit it out of the park in terms of consumer feedback. All of the signs were there. And it was, I think, finally all of this closed 2 months before the launch event in 20.
Okay. Did you take pre-orders?
Yeah. And what was happening was that it was snowballing into sort of some crazy demand. The limited edition vehicles all got booked out in, I think, less than, if I remember, the first limited edition series that got booked out was in less than an hour, 77 vehicles. The second time that it happened, which was a space edition vehicle of the F-77, got booked out under 90 seconds, right? So that demand was so significant that our website, suffered, downtime the traffic was so high because people were exploring, and it wasn't just, okay, people coming to all book it. They're all excited about the motorcycle. They're all checking it out in different aspects, watching the videos, right? And
I think
all of them were,
what was very heartening for us was leading up to the launch, there was awareness created and pre-order interests having come in from 190 countries, right? And that was crazy. And this was completely organic. We hadn't done any sort of performance marketing. I think the only thing we've done is showcase our R&D and our testing processes. That was our marketing until that point, right? And that had reached 190 countries, and there was at least one person from each of these 190 countries that had put in a request for a motorcycle. But of course, certain markets, there were larger groups of people. We could see the word of mouth also happening. If somebody in Germany made a booking, we would get an email, and we would see that over the next 10 days, that zone is now falling into a few more interest coming in, bookings coming, etc.
But
So-
can you serve those markets? Wouldn't you need to get the transportation authority of Germany to certify the vehicle before you can export it
Absolutely.
there? Okay.
Absolutely. So what we are talking about is organic potential consumer interest coming in. We hadn't collected money from people outside of India at that point. I think this also gave us a good view into our strategy as a company. So if you're, I'm sure you're aware, we showcased the F77 and launched the F99 at EICMA, November 2023.
yeah. So this is basically the Milan Motorcycle Show. In Italian, there's an acronym abbreviation for EICMA. But the idea here is this is the one place in the world where everybody comes to showcase their motorcycle, right? And that's where you see all of cutting edge technology. And last year in November, we showcased the F77 and the F99, especially to European markets at the Milan Motorcycle Show, right? And all of the people who had been waiting for us throughout all of the European countries actually came down, checked out the motorcycles, and right now is when we're going through, we've completed certain aspects of the battery certification, the company certification at an ISO level, to actually go ahead and, deliver these motorcycles in Europe, right? So there's still certain aspects of the local certification going on, but the idea is now we're at that stage where, very soon we will start to deliver these bikes
So we'll start this year.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And what is the difference between the F77 and F99?
Yeah, so the F99 represents, so it's called the F99 racing platform, right? The factory racing platform. So just to give you some historical background, like most motorcycle companies, OEMs in the world, usually have, a separate project where their racing endeavors are taken up, right? Which
Like
is,
you'd know, Ferrari, Porsche, a lot of them have a separate division into racing, right? So it was like intent as the R&D there follows kind of an autonomous approach where you're not,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and you're not solving at the start. At the start, you're not solving for commercial objectives, but you're solving super complex or highly challenging technical problem. And once that solution is obtained, then it becomes interesting from a business standpoint to see how soon commercialize that. That plus the fact that I think one of our cornerstones is performance, right? So made a lot of sense to build the product and the brand in that direction towards the future, which is, I think electric racing is going to be a very strong part of the transition of mobility itself. And I think we are at the forefront of that today with the F99 platform.
Yeah. So this motorcycle is capable of going more than 270 kilometers per hour. And what is more important in the spec to me is the actual process that we followed, right? So this is exactly the same thing that we did 5-6 years ago when we started out with the F77, right? We're building something that didn't exist, right? We were pushing the boundaries of what is possible with the kind of tech. While there was a sort of, eventually it has to turn into a commercially available product. At that time, it was all about solving some really hard problem, And that's exactly what we got back into doing last year on the F99. And, all of the thought that we had put aside when we were building up the F77 as a 2020 product, right? There were certain things that seemed too outrageous. There were things that seemed that, if we did this, it'll be very hard to actually commercially produce this. It'll make the vehicle much, much faster. But, I don't know if we'll be able to meet the price point. Or
things like carbon fiber, for instance, right? It's not scalable at a mass production level, but at smaller volumes, definitely something that we're looking at.
Yeah, active aerodynamics. It's one of the only motorcycles in the world which actually has active aerodynamics, where different surfaces. So
that means there are parts on the motorcycle that react to the environment and the riding conditions around. For instance, what we were solving for here is your ability to have more planted cornering, faster entry and exit into corners. So as you lean, a certain winglet, which is part of the bike, opens out to change the air pressure on one side of the motorcycle versus the other. So you get a more planted feel as you corner. So we are talking about very, very minute improvements in time around a racetrack, right? On a lap-by-lap basis. So that's where this sort of innovation comes into play.
And again, this goes back to a little bit of the aviation approach, because on fighter jets and these kinds of aircraft, you have different flight surfaces that help you maneuver very rapidly and very quickly in dogfights and these kinds of things, right? So those kind of flight surfaces are there on the motorcycle. And this was an aspiration that we had, several years ago. And it's now part of the F99. And, all of these things are coming true in terms of, again, pushing the boundaries in terms of what is possible.
Building an electric vehicle that does 270 kilometers is insane. The amount of R&D and safety that you need to put, testing that you need to put these machines through from a battery and a motor and of course the whole mechanical aspects, right? Because as speed increases beyond a certain point, all of these things go up exponentially. So what worked to do 150 kilometers an hour, it's not just doubling that capability to hit 250, 300 kilometers an hour. It's a very different R&D approach altogether. And so counterintuitive is things have to get stronger, but also get much, much lighter. So think about that challenge.
So in fact, there are so many things that, actually blow our minds even today, right? So for example, we now routinely rent out airports and airstrips to test the F77 motorcycle. So you have a 2 kilometer to 4 kilometer runway, which is
it's completely controlled environment. We can maintain safety and have our protocols in place.
So obviously, when we did it for the first time, that blew my mind, right? But today we've reached a stage where even that is insufficient to be able to test the F99, right? Because you need more longer distances, you need more buffer, you need more safety protocols. So an airport is insufficient. When in the early days of Ultraviolette, that felt like a mind-boggling thing to be, renting out an airport.
Yeah. So how many units of F77 have you sold till date? How many ones have you been selling it for?
Yeah. So we've sold, I think we've built out about 800 odd motorcycles, and we've delivered a large part of that. And basically this is mostly been delivered
in Bangalore.
Yeah, in Bangalore. And now there are a few vehicles, because there's such demanding customers from other parts of the country. We did deliver and set up service in Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, Cochin, and Mumbai. And that's where now the, outlets and the distribution and our retail presence is.
So in the next 6 months, you'll see us across about 15 different cities, spanning south to north and east.
Yeah.
How does one set up the sales channel for selling a motorcycle? Like, do you appoint dealers who set up showrooms, or are you going to set up showrooms yourself? And how will you scale up the sales of it?
So the first experience center that we built out is called the UV hangar, the Ultraviolette hangar. That's where we're sitting out of right now as well. And this was a template for us to figure out the right experience for a customer, the design of the store format, the allocation of the real estate toward showcasing the motorcycles, and in a way where you get enough room to touch and feel, and you have a great ride experience, And how do you I mean, the location that we are at, we are also on one of the wide main roads in Bangalore. So to get a feel of the performance aspect of the bike, I mean, no urban condition will do justice, but you do get some sense of that. So I think it was important to solve all of this. We've taken some time. We've not rushed into setting up multiple stores or onboarding too many dealers until we've gotten it right here. I think now we are confident, and that's why work has already started. And the cities that Niraj mentioned are going to go live rather Cochin, Chennai, Hyderabad, Pune, Ahmedabad, and a couple of other places. And I think over 6 months, you will see 15 more cities coming in. But the model is going to be Bangalore, or this particular facility is company owned, company operated. Scaling up will be more of a dealer operated business. Of course, Ultraviolette is going to be involved sales training and a service training and a service assist perspective.
Good. Okay, understood. How big is the market in India for a 3.5-4 lakh rupees bike?
So, okay. So the way that we look at this segment, it's not just about, the upfront price of the vehicle, right? What is interesting is to look at it from the point of view of how many motorcycles or vehicles in the two-wheeler space are bought with the perspective of it's not pure utility value, right? Anything that a person buys for more than 2 lakh rupees in a motorcycle is bought for reasons that go beyond
it's a
pure
lifestyle
functional.
Beyond just commute. Yes,
right? Lifestyle, pride of ownership, adventure, performance, right? There are different aspects of it. And all of these are markets that we actually tap into. So if you look at it from that lens, it is quite a large number. It's almost close to 1 million vehicles sold annually, right? In fact, the entire market for these kind of vehicles is globally about 3 million vehicles, right? So India represents 1/3 of that market. Europe represents another 800,000 vehicles annually in this space. The US about 500,000, and you have LATAM and East Asia representing another huge market. So that's the actual segment that we address.
And
F77.
Let me add one more point there. Now we're, I think, closing in on 1 year since the first delivery of the vehicles, right? Or I think that point was about a week back. We have a few people that have clocked about close to 20 or over 20,000 kilometers, and they've saved about 75,000-80,000 rupees in 1 year of operation alone, right? So now, when you announce that the product is going to go on sale and all of that, you may not realize this, but now there is tangible evidence of the benefits of a well-engineered, efficient electric vehicle. And I think if you think about it that way, can sort of compare to an IC option, can an F77 pay itself off in 4 to 5 years of operation, right? And the other question people have is on the batteries. I think there is a concern nationwide or worldwide that what about batteries? Do I need to reinvest in batteries? And from the way we've engineered, designed, and tested the batteries out, I think we can very confidently guarantee an 8 to 10 year usage period where you have no concern, or through your ownership cycle of owning an Ultraviolette product, a battery replacement should not even be a concern, right? And I think we'll have more information coming out in the coming weeks on this front, more data being available as well. But I mean, that's the way we are looking at it. It's not just what the upfront cost is, it's a whole ownership model that you need to consider as well.
And how much of your production is localized, and how much is like imported components? What is the level of localization that?
I mean, except the cells and the magnets that go into the motors and a very small number of the electronic components, I think pretty much every other component is completely localized in India.
So the way actually we look at it is what part of the value is captured in India, right? So there may be commodity part or proprietary commodity part, that are on the vehicle, but are very specialized in manufacturing, like Narayan said, the cells, right? In different parts of Japan or Taiwan or, Korea, that are coming in and being part of the vehicle. or even the microcontrollers, microchip. In India, I mean, it's going to take another, half a decade for microcontrollers, microchip being manufactured here. So as a consequence of this, what we are importing is mostly commodity part, and the value that is attributed to it is a much smaller, percentage. It's less than, I would say, probably 30% of the cost of the overall vehicle. In fact, I would think it's actually lower than that. We have to recheck those estimates. And a lot of the value is captured in India because even the assembly of the PCBs, etc., it's all done locally here. And most of the value addition is in India, right? Only the commodities are coming from us.
Okay, fascinating. Understood. And do you have financing tie-ups in place? Because I guess that would be like a key thing
Yes.
to. Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So in all two-wheeler purchases, a significant portion of all these purchases are with, some sort of financing support. And we do have most of the larger banks and tie-ups in place to make it easier to finance the vehicles, as well as even exchange options we announced recently, I think, to facilitate, a seamless transition to electric, the exciting electric vehicle.
Okay. So you raised about, I guess, about 40-ish million so far. I guess you said about 16 million till 2019, and then you did a 24 million round.
Right.
Something
Yeah.
like
Cumulatively, maybe north of 50.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the way in which you see these investors getting an exit? What's your long-term vision?
So I think, see, most automotive companies, the usual sort of manner. See, first of all, I think the guys who back us, they're not directly in it for the exit, right? They're all in it to create a long-term success. But in terms of liquidity, right? If we talk about liquidity, then I think the usual path, one of them is going for a listing event, or, in some form of, lots of companies choose to stay private and go down the path of dividends, and, the models are changing globally, right? But the point in all of these cases is to build a fundamentally strong business where it is self-sustainable, where it is generating value both from a consumer point of view as well as from a shareholder point of view. And I think that's what we end up focusing on. There is no particular rush to, get to that stage. I think the rush is to sort of make sure that we are delivering value to the folks who are buying the vehicle.
By what number will you be profitable? Like at 10,000 bikes, will you be profitable, or will it be at 50,000, or what's the...
Right. So from a gross margin perspective, the variable parts, the cost of the materials, we are already there, right? We are positive from a unit economic standpoint. Then comes the stage of, profitability at a plant or a factory level, which we will end up, positive this year, which is recovering all of the cost from a factory perspective. And then when we talk about a scale, that goes beyond 10,000 is also when we become profitable at a corporate or a company level, which starts to, starts to cover even the R&D expenses and things like that. And that I think will happen through 2025 as we cross over into the next stage of growth. I'd say in the next 18 months itself.
Amazing. Do you have any advice for founders who are listening to this show? I mean, you're building hardware out of India, which is, extremely rare. And as you yourself saw the investor response to this attempt to build hardware from India. So, what advice would you like to give to aspiring founders?
I think just mentally prepare yourself for a longer journey than a service or a software company where, your POCs can be built out in a few months. Here, it's going to take a few years. And I think the initial focus needs to be on having a kick-ass team that supports you and believes in your vision. It is a collective effort. It can't be done by a few individuals. You need a group of people to come together to sort of pull this off.
Yeah. And I'd also add that whatever area that is being worked upon, while, the aspirations have to be ambitious and, sort of dream big, it also has to be something that no matter how difficult it gets, you should be so excited about working on it that it should overcome all of those limitations, constraints, because you are going to end up, in those kinds of situations where you're really backed into a corner, but you still need to make progress, right? And usually we've seen this happen is that a lot of people choose to go down building certain things because it's a fad, because everyone's doing it, because it seems like the investor sentiment is there in that particular direction, because, even investors tend to operate, in kind of herds, right? There's a kind of herd mentality that happens sometimes, but those are all fad, right? If you are not in it because it is exciting to you, because you like, or you're not, you have to be passionate about it. If you're not in it for that reason, when times get difficult, I mean, it's going to be really hard to stick to that objective, right? Yeah. So that's our advice. And also, I think with companies like Speciale Invest and Vishesh, I think hardware is no longer seen as such a taboo in India, right? The kinds of investments that we've been seeing happen, we are so excited about it, right? Like when in 2016, if someone told us that, there'd be 3 companies making space launch vehicles, companies making satellite, robotics companies in India, and, there are sufficient number of investors at a angel seed, Series A, Series B stage. I mean, it actually makes us really happy that it's happening, right?